My name is Grant Pooke. I teach art history within the School of Arts here at the University of Kent, UK. The subject of my recent academic research has been the work and legacy of the Indian artist Brij Mohan Anand. A couple of years ago I was taking a public seminar on visual arts writing in New Delhi, and I was introduced to some of his work and scratchboards that had been found in an archive in New Delhi. And from that developed an academic interest and engagement with his practice. Behind me is a photo taken in the 1950s, early 1960s, which shows the artist in New Delhi. The image speaks to the man. Anand held passionate political and social convictions. He was an outsider, a maverick, a pacifist. His family witnessed and took part in some of the foundational events which have defined modern India. Anand's emergence as a talented and largely self-taught artist coincided with India's bitter struggle for independence and what became, in effect, widespread resistance to colonial British power. Anand's older brother, Madan Mohan, born in 1907, was among the first to be shot and killed at the massacre of Amritsar in 1919, when British soldiers opened fire on a large but unarmed civilian gathering in one of the central public spaces of the Sikh holy city. Anand's family were traumatised by his death. His father, Mani Ram, a member of India's wealthy middle class, was politically radicalised by the events and aftermath of Amritsar, turning away from Congress party politics to support the Communist Party of India, whose members were committed to the violent overthrow of the Raj. As a teenager, Anand witnessed the endgame and unravelling of empire in India. The Quit India movement, 1942, and the Bengal famine, which followed a year later, were part of the backdrop to the diaspora and displacement which followed independence. Anand witnessed firsthand the departure of British troops in 1947 and the subsequent bloodshed and dislocation of Partition. After his father's death in 1942, he travelled throughout the Indian subcontinent before settling in Delhi in 1948-49. And this image behind is believed to date from this time. Anand's practice tracked and critiqued 5 Cold War decades, within which India embarked upon technological and economic modernisation, achieving a leading status as South Asia's power broker. In doing so, Anand recorded India's emergence as a modern, secular state. He made extensive use of scratchboard, a technique widely employed for newspapers and technical illustration, which became part of a highly distinctive aesthetic, and it was something which he was involved with very much through from the mid-1950s right through to the mid-1980s. And behind me is a photograph. This is Anand in front of 2 works which he completed, one in 1966 and the other in 1970. This picture was taken in the mid-1970s. One of the scratchboards is concerned with the theme of regional conflict in South Asia, including US intervention in the region, and the other warns against the dangers of polarised ideology and thinking. Scratchboard was a medium which allowed few opportunities for revision. In this sense, I think it suited Anand's artistic and political temperament well. His scratchboards explore a range of symbolic and cosmological themes. In one sense, of course, they are conventional, revisualising existing gender relationships. But his compositions also make explicit the technocratic and secular shifts of India's Cold War period, and as such remain historic markers of modernity. A series of late dystopian landscapes recently discovered as part of an extensive archive formed a sustained response to the politics of neo-imperialism and India's own programme of nuclear expansion. Although receptive to various strands of international modernism, Anand remained a figurative artist long before a younger generation redeveloped the idiom as part of a more politicised response to a westernised postmodernism in the 1970s and early 80s. Anand's compositional fluency and acute inventiveness as a respected commercial illustrator and designer ensured demand from a wide range of agencies, publishers and public journals. Over the past 3 years, an extensive archive has been undergoing restoration, which features work completed between 1937 and 84. And this is quite extensive. It includes over 1,200 artworks and another 300 or so commercial illustrations. Some of these are to be showcased in the coming year. As commentators on post-colonial culture have recognised, the achievements of artists like Anand have been largely understood through the Western gaze. Within post-war Indian art history, there has been widespread coverage of a comparatively small number of well-known and typically émigré artists whose aesthetic and international affiliations have perhaps been publicised at the expense of the work of a wider range of practitioners, men and women whose work has not conformed to the template of a westernised abstract modernism. While several members of the progressive artists group left to make careers in the UK, in New York, in France in the 1940s and 50s, the trajectory of those who more typically stayed, like Anand, has received less critical attention. Even some revisions to accounts of Indian art history have continued an antecedent tradition of partiality and selective omission. The discourse of subaltern studies has begun to address aspects of non-Western, pre- and post-colonial cultures on their own terms, rather than according to the canons of a westernised art history. This remains very much work in progress. Many visual artists await the same considered treatment which has historically been given to Western peers and contemporaries. As the work of Sarat Maharaj has recently underlined, the concept of translation has itself become a metaphor in negotiating some of these cultural differences. Although this process recognises the limits of hybridity, it also questions default assumptions of transparency between cultures. Much of Anand's work preceded these more recent discussions and theoretical debates. But from his ambivalence towards the academic legacy of the British art schools in India, and to claims made both by and for India's westernised avant-garde of the 1950s and 1960s, it might be argued that Anand intuitively recognised the dangers of cultural recolonisation and its attendant problems. Anand's work and legacy remains, for me, of immense consequence. Why? Because it questioned the arrogance of power and asserts the conviction that men and women should fashion their own futures and in conditions of their own choosing. Thank you for your time.